Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another monthly market session. Great to have you with us for this wonderful summer month of July. We will get into the content of what we're covering in just a minute, but really quickly, want to introduce myself for any of you who may be new or those of you watching a little later on YouTube. My name is Paul Nalabandian. I am your local DMV realtor expert covering the most important market stats, what's going on in the economy, what relates to mortgage rates, all of that stuff every month to keep you up to date for your clients. Or if you are a client, if you are a consumer joining us today, you're thinking about buying or selling, we're going to give you all of the key important information to help inform your decisions so you can make the right choice for what is going on with you and your life goals right about now. Temi, my wonderful colleague. I also want to add that when I say colleague, I am with Fulcrum Residential, one of the top teams in the country and proudly affiliated with Keller Williams Capital Properties, where I also serve on the Agent Leadership Council. And when I say my wonderful colleague, Temi, she's a Fulcrum and a Keller Williams colleague. Would you like to introduce yourself for the folks today?
I am Tammy from the block, assisting Paul as a moderator. Good morning, Maggie. Maggie is on and ready.
And so, on the topic of moderating, we used to be on Zoom. We would have live conversational interaction, which was incredible. We're no longer able to have that now with this live stream format, but we love it to be as interactive as possible. So please, right now, for those of you who are on, just drop your name in the chat. Let me get that set up, actually.
Good morning,
Let
Tom.
us know where you are here from, and also let us know what you would like to cover, what's important, what are you hearing about, what are kind of the hot button topics for you and your clients right now.
And what are you hoping for?
All right.
I think my biggest thing in this is always just being on top of things for my clients and making sure that I'm giving the proper message to them and making sure I have the proper details and data.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm looking forward to for this call.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to actually know what is happening in the market rather than just. I mean, there's so many clickbait articles out now. I see in the national media and the local media talked about last month. There was a survey released by Bright MLS that I thought was a little misleading, and then I saw it picked up in the Washingtonian, and then the information in there was even a little more misleading than the initial survey. So it's important to cover all of that. We're about to jump right in. But first, want to cover my coffee of the day. It is a wonderful Ethiopian coffee, Kolla Bolcha from Onyx, and it's rather delicious. Highly recommend it. Tasty notes are dried apricot, black tea, red apple, and white grape, and I would say that is pretty spot on. I'm getting
Talk.
some echo there, Timmy. I don't know if getting a little echo. I'm hearing my sound coming back through the speaker. Not sure if
Okay.
you're hearing
I'll put myself on mute just in case, but I think it's interesting that you have a black coffee that also has black tea in it.
black tea notes, not actual tea in there. It's Ethiopian land race, a blend of beans from there. But yes, that it is delicious. If I was in the office where you are at right now, I would share some. Okay, we are going to get started. We are going to be covering the same format that we do typically every month. Obviously, the underlying information changes, but we try to stick to the same schedule. We're going to start with mortgage rates and economic data. Hold on, sorry, I'm getting some weird action here on my screen. We're going to start with mortgage rates, the underlying economic data, which are very important to determine what the mortgage rates are in a given time. And then right now, of course, can't talk about the economy without also running into tariffs and what's going on with the administration. Then we are going to jump into real estate specific data. We'll cover what is happening in the DMV for the most recently reported month from Bright MLS. That is June. Then we'll go into the weekly data from right up until the end of last week in July. I'm also going to touch on some granular data, some stuff I looked up just yesterday, about as real time as you can get to see where the market is at, because things seem to be changing just a little bit. Then we're going to touch on just a little more specific about administration policies, how that's affecting real estate. Then we are going to jump into the key takeaways. How does that sound, Tammy?
That sounds good, Paul.
And good morning, Virginia. Good morning, Maggie. Good morning, Jean. Good morning, Chris and Tom. Great to have you all with us. And like I said, please, we would love this to be as interactive as possible. Typically, if you have a question, if you have kind of a burning concern, something you think is happening in the market, something you're worried about, if you're an agent, there are other agents who are concerned about that too. If you are a home buyer, there are other home buyers concerned about that as well. If you're a home seller, a potential home seller, then there are probably other people with those same questions. So please keep the questions coming. I love this to be as interactive as possible.
Also, just a
Oh,
reminder that we're also on Instagram. So if you have to somehow jump off of YouTube and be on Instagram, we are moderating the Instagram questions as well.
all right. Sorry, jumping around with the display there. I'm having some weird feedback on my side. Not sure if it is happening everywhere. All right. Where are mortgage rates at? What are people seeing out there? And this is, again, I'd love to have boots on the ground, concrete information. I'll be talking about what Mortgage News Daily has been reported, but I would love to see in the comments what people are getting, what real world rates people are getting for their clients who have locked within the past week or so. We've been talking about this for a bit. We're seeing a fair amount of volatility in mortgage rates, but you can see that rates dropped briefly below 6.7 at the beginning of the month, but are right now right around where they were at, locked at 6.25. That's nice. Rates are right around where they at when we met last month. So we're pretty much at the same spot. All of these that you see are within like 0.01, 0.02 of where they were at last month, except FHA and VA both up about 10 bips from where we were at last month. Anyone else have a client lock within the past week or so? 625 is a great rate. Tom, was
Yeah,
that for a 30-year fixed?
yeah. Last night, client came in at 6.6, 6.7. Great credit score, but that was conventional. Tom was at VA, was at
And I'm just going to go back
30.
to this for a moment. You can see pretty much since, really since early March, we have been in this band of 6.75 to 7, just going up and down, briefly a little bit above that, briefly a little bit below that. But we've a lot of volatility, but within that band. And I would say hopefully it kind of stays that way, because with all of the economic factors, which we'll get into, not expecting rates to go a lot lower in the short term, there is potential they could go back higher again. VA. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, VA, you can see here, is a little bit below. Good morning, Blue Jay Properties. Okay, how are people feeling about the economy? And while we're getting some input there in the chat, for anyone who might be new this month, going to touch on, this is more for when you get the deck, if you want to take a closer look. For this slide, here we just have some nice color coding to make it simple. Why do I talk about the economy? Well, you essentially have, what is the economy? The economy is employment, inflation, retail sales, manufacturing, output, industrial production. Overly simplified, yes, but that's in a nutshell what makes up the economy. And then what impacts what is happening in the economy and what reacts what is happening to the economy? Well, that's Federal Reserve policy, and that is mainly influenced by the federal funds rate, quantitative tightening, quantitative easing, and then now a heavier lever that's coming into play is tariffs and trade policy. You take all of those three things together, and you have the bulk of what is making up the bond and the MBS market. When I say MBS, I'm talking about mortgage-backed securities. Most mortgages are repackaged into securities, and what they can get on the open market is the biggest impact on what the mortgage rates are for our actual clients. And mortgage-backed securities are competing with a lot of other products for investors. One of them is a 10-year treasury. And so how the bond market is doing in general is, like I said, it greatly impacts where mortgage rates are at. That's why we talk about all of this stuff. And the more you understand what is happening overall in these various components, then the better understanding you'll have of what's going on in the bond market, what's happening with mortgage-backed securities, and you'll be able to understand where mortgage rates are headed before they get there. Now, adding the caveat to that, there's such a level of high unpredictability right now with administration policy and what's been announced, what is actually going to happen, what will be implemented and then pulled back. There's so much uncertainty that to be honest, right now, one of my colleagues asked me where mortgage rates are headed, and I said the only thing I can tell you is there's going to be a lot of volatility, and right now I honestly don't know exactly where they're headed because we don't know what is going to happen. There's still so much uncertainty with tariff levels. Now we have the new budget that is going to be looks like it's going to be smooth sailing. I know there's some senators expressing some concern about it right now, but uh, if that budget is implemented, we're talking about $3.4 trillion added to the deficit. That's going to impact treasuries. That's going to impact the bond market. That's going to impact mortgage rates. So a little harder to predict where mortgage rates are headed at right now. But if you understand all of this stuff, you'll have a better understanding of what's going on and a little more insight. And good morning, Kimber. Great to have you with us this morning. Tierney also as well. Would love to hear your input, what you're seeing with your clients, what you're seeing with the market as we head through this stuff. So touching on the first impact, GDP growth. So we had the last estimate for Q1 2025 GDP. The final and third estimate came out June 26. It was revised downward. So even a little bit slower quarter than had been reported before. We had a contraction of 0.5%. Right now, the models for Q2, even though we're just out of Q2, but the models for Q2, Atlanta GDP now is projecting a 2.6% growth for this past quarter. The official numbers, the Bureau of Economic Analysis will be releasing their first official estimate of that a little later in the month. But that shows it. If that ends up being the case, then it will obviously be a stronger quarter than Q1 was. But as you can see here, Atlanta GDP now, their model tends to run at the high end of all blue chip respected models. So it would not be surprising to see actual GDP come in somewhere below that. Now we are going to jump into inflation, the consumer price index. And this is very important as it relates to Federal Reserve policy. There are some major problems with this, though. We touched on briefly last month. We're going to touch on again just momentarily. But so the 1 month change came in at 0.3% increase. The 12-month all items came in at 2.7%. Now, the 0.3 rise for the month, that was driven largely by shelter. That was the largest monthly gain since January. And 2.7 for all items, that was so we're having inflation heat up. That was in line with economists' expectations, though. A little bit concerning, though, if you look under the hood, is that the cost for core goods minus autos rose at the fastest monthly rate in about 3 years. And unfortunately, this isn't surprising. Everyone expected this. It's just kind of a matter of when. And this is tariffs starting to take a little bit of a bite into prices. Now, there's no question that tariffs have to affect prices to some degree. The question is just by how much. And how much they'll affect is anyone's guess. There's a lot of uncertainty as well because these businesses, they all want to keep their profit margins and they all want to keep these vibrant businesses going forward. But the problem is consumer demand is waning. And the real question is how much of a price increase on goods will consumers stomach? And so the real question is the cost of everything is going up. And just something to keep an eye on is how much of that increased cost can businesses pass on to consumers? All evidence is pointing that they're going to have trouble passing on too much, but some will definitely be passed on. The concerning part here. So yeah, we're seeing inflation numbers heating up. We just talked about that. The concerning part is like how accurate even is this data though? And I would say, so just in my non-expert but study this stuff super closely opinion, is it's accurate as a floor, but we're not necessarily sure if the ceiling is right. So there's no doubt that we're getting some upward pressure on pricing. My concern is that prices might be rising even a little higher than has been indicated, but we're having a higher level of uncertainty going into this data. I touched on this last month. I know we have a lot of people coming back. Don't want to rehash it in too much detail, but for anyone who missed last month, I just want to say, to come up with these CPI numbers, it's an incredibly complex operation involving hundreds of government employees. They're called enumerators. These enumerators literally go out each month manually checking prices of various goods and services throughout the country. And when they can't find a price on a certain item, they'll impute the price of the same item in a different area of the country or a similar item in that area of the country. This is called different cell imputation. Now, without digging too far into the details here, just the TLDR is that this is essentially educated guesswork. Ideally, you would like a lower amount of guesswork going into these figures. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So in this chart here, just want to point out that bottom blue level, that's the level of different cell imputation that has been going into the monthly CPI numbers going back since last year. Generally, 10% or less of these prices are guesses. So we've got 90%. The CPI, what they come up with the CPI number based upon 90% actual real world prices that they're looking at, a specific price of a specific good in a specific location. They're tracking all of this. Less than 10% of that is these educated guesses. As you can see in the past 3 months, that's risen to about a third. In April, I think it was 29%. In May, it was about 30%. In June, it's 35%. And that's very troubling. As I said in the last slide, Bureau of Labor Statistics, they provide this data. They said there's a hiring freeze, which has caused them to not have the manpower they need in order to accurately come up with this data. So just when you're seeing these numbers, when you're seeing, oh, inflation is rising, just know it is rising, but there's a fair chance that it's rising even higher because there is a greater degree of guesswork in this. And just so you don't think, I know sometimes I get a little overexcited in this and I'll see things like this that is literally, it's just blowing my mind as I'm reading this and seeing what is happening, what the costs are for some of these federal government reductions. I just want to point out, I was popping around. I was like, is anybody else going nuts about this as well? Because I know economists are concerned, but at a broader level, is anyone really concerned? And it doesn't seem like at a broader level people are. But I did see a Bloomberg article called "This Chart Right Here, the most worrying economic chart in the world." And I would have to agree with them because there is so much that is based on CPI numbers. I mean, a lot of you, anybody who has HELOCs, anybody who has rates that are set on prime or these benchmark rates, the inflation numbers are key in affecting them. So this has real world consequences in just a limitless number of ways. So that's just something to keep an eye on going forward. Love to hear any thoughts on that rant before we carry on too much farther than the economy. So jobs market, just going to touch on this. 147,000 jobs were added last month, slightly above expectations. The job market is continuing a little stronger than expected. We're expecting some softening in the labor market, just with these higher tariff prices and other economic factors. Expectations are the job market is softening. Jobs added is strong. Unemployment is 4.1. We've been hovering in this basically 4 to 4.2% band since last May. So not a whole lot changed there, but there's a lot of information that is indicating under the hood the job market is softening. So the most recent reported total of total unemployment claims, which is the most reliable indicator we have of the total size of the unemployed worker population, that was at its highest number since November of 2021. And so we're talking about the highest level of unemployment claims in almost 4 years. And as we talked about last month, there has been a hiring slowdown of temp workers. So it seems we're seeing employers, they're they're making shorter term decisions related to hiring. So they're not necessarily starting massive layoffs yet, but maybe they're a little slower to refill some positions, and they're taking some intermediate steps. And that makes sense because a lot of people are in a wait and see approach. There's a lot of uncertainty right now, and we all markets need certainty in order to make informed decisions. And when you don't have certainty, a lot of these entities will hold off making permanent type decisions until they have a little bit more information. So for me, this makes sense with what's happening in the labor market. It makes sense. We're seeing the shorter term indicators indicate a lot of softening, but the bigger numbers are holding steady for the time being. Yep. Yeah, Maggie, you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's so much. Those CPI numbers are so important. The fact that there's a lot more guesswork going into them right now is alarming. All right, we have not had a Federal Reserve meeting since we last met, but in general, we've had some more comments come out. We've also I don't know if any of you saw again, the president yesterday news leaked of a White House session where he was talking with lawmakers about firing Chairman Powell, and that's rattled markets a little bit. But for the time being, Chairman Powell is still the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So what's he's been saying? What has the Federal Reserve been talking about lately? Let's wait to see if any of you comment on that. I'll just kind of reiterate. So, as I said, we haven't had a meeting since we last met. Last meeting was June 17th to 18th. Next meeting will be July 29th to 30th. Now, the general expectation was that this next July meeting, there wasn't going to be a rate cut. These recent CPI numbers have pretty much all but made that a certainty. Federal Reserve is still in wait and see mode. They're expecting tariffs to slow the economy and drive prices up. So it's like, what do they try to rectify more? Market expectations are now hold steady in July, like I said, but there is now expectation that, or a higher expectation than there was before, that there will be a rate cut in September. And so that is just kind of something to keep an eye on. Like I said, the labor market is softening, and the pricing pressure so far from tariffs hasn't been as much as feared. And because of that, there's a higher belief that we'll see a rate cut in September, but uh, so much uncertainty between now and then. And yeah, Virginia, our resident expert economist, is saying similar policies until the fall or winter. And Sam is commenting that the Fed there's anticipation of some inflation, and that's absolutely right. There absolutely is the expectation of some additional upward pricing pressure. The question is just by how much. All right, popping over to some of the other economic indicators, important things to watch. As of yesterday, the 10-year Treasury was at 4.453. That's up about 15 bips since we last met. I'm just taking a quick peek. As of what's reported up to date is 4.460. So pretty much the same thing. Retail sales we don't have yet. Actually, they might have been released at 8 a.m. as of last night when I was finalizing. Retail sales beat expectations. Okay. Well, expectations were that I thought retail sales were going to be mediocre at best. And that was the general market expectation. It appears retail sales increased by 0.6%. That was after an almost 1% drop in May. So this is interesting. And like I said, there's so much uncertainty out there. There's so much going on that these numbers could be by, I know we had a big rush before of people running to buy things before tariffs were implemented. There was a little bit of a reprieve on the implementation of tariffs. So is this unexpected bump in June, is that also due to people making more purchases, making bigger purchases now before the expectation of price increase? And this goes back, it's so important to look at the actual data and look at the big numbers and see things on a larger scale. But it's also fun and it's also important to get a little bit more micro analysis and information. And that's where we all come in. So I'd love to hear for everyone who's on here right now or later watching on YouTube. If you're watching right now, drop in the comments. If you're seeing the video replay later, drop in the comments there. Has the specter of tariffs and increased prices, has that been affecting your spending patterns? Has anyone moved up a big purchase? Has anyone purchased a car that they were maybe on the fence about or thinking about buying 6 months from now or next year, or furniture or anything like that? Would love to hear just people on here. What's has this been affecting your behavior?
I think my
All right.
my only thing is I know the EV tax credit is ending September 30th.
Mhm.
So thinking about moving up the timeline and purchasing an EV.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard a fair amount of friends and clients talking about that as well. All right, manufacturing output. Just going to touch on this stuff quickly, churn through these, then get to the real estate specific data. So, industrial production, think tangible and intangible goods and services. Everything increased by 0.3% in June. Manufacturing output, that just think of a tangible. That's the subset of industrial production of tangible goods. Accounts for about 75% of that, rose one tenth of a percent. So industrial output exceeded expectations, but the rise was due in large part to an increase in the utilities index, and specifically electric utilities. We are in the middle of the dog days of summer. We've had unseasonably hot spells coming in through various parts of the country. So that's just one of those things where you can have some one-offs. You're having a lot of extreme heat and people are using more electricity. I don't see that as a meaningful increase in manufacturing or a meaningful increase. So I would say these numbers don't really tell me anything right now. Just kind of okay, that matches expectations. And less summer traveling. Oh, that's interesting. So it sounds like Virginia is saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that kind of toning down maybe some of the larger travel purchases, the higher expenditures, but then spending a little more locally. That's interesting. And the data that I've seen, again, I love to hear this stuff, and then you kind of match it with where the data's at. The data I've seen is tracking that exactly. We are seeing a fair drop in travel and leisure spending. Again, that's just an indicator that people are worried about the economy. When people start to get worried about the economy, they pull back on the easiest discretionary spending they can. And a lot of times that's trips. It's big chunk of change you were going to spend, and you can just change that relatively short notice. Maggie mentions that some of her clients are delaying financial decisions, buying a home or switching jobs due to the uncertainty about where rates are. Yeah, and that's a great point. We're going to talk about that when we get into the real estate specific data, because I'm seeing that with buyer activity. We're just seeing a lot more volatility in what's happening in the market. And I think it's because you have so many people kind of on the fence and maybe postponing decisions and then seeing things change a little bit and moving forward, or planning to move forward and pausing. So that's the data is totally matching that as well. What are people feeling as far as where we are at in this market? I talk to people and read local and national articles. I hear a lot of things that don't necessarily match what's happening. I feel like it's people's kind of gut reaction or feeling to what's going on in the real estate market is affected more by where we have been and the feeling of change than where we actually are. But curious to get your thoughts. So, start with the 30,000-foot view. And Kimber mentions that consumer sentiment is at a lower level than COVID. Yeah, I'm waiting to see the University of Michigan does a well-respected survey of consumer sentiment, and that hasn't been released yet for this month. Curious to see where that's at. But you have a lot of, Kimber's absolutely right, a lot of people who are very worried about what is going on in the economy. And when you're worried about what is happening, that can cause a lot of people to pause real estate decisions. Or for all of the agents and professionals on here, it's like, and I say this is one of my key takeaways, now it's more important than ever to be providing that expert advice, because whatever decisions our clients make, the only time it's a bad decision is if it's an uninformed decision. And so here we are accumulating knowledge, providing as much expert advice, giving them an accurate understanding of the real estate landscape, of the economic landscape, allowing them to make an informed decision. And then that's now more important than ever, because sometimes when you're having these worries and you're seeing these headlines about things, then you can make decisions based upon fear, not actually, not actual information. So 30,000-foot view overall, what's going on in the market. And right now, we are right about on track for the same level as closed units as we had last year and the year before. We've had a little bit increase in pace. Last month, we were on pace for 48,000 in change units. Now we bumped up to about 49,000. So it'll be interesting to see where it ends up, but it'll be right in the range of 50,000 units, which is right about what we did last year, right about where we did the year before. So for those of you who've been in the business at least a couple of years, it's kind of, there's level of uncertainty overlaid on all of that, but so far to date, very similar to recent increases. Going into, we are seeing some changes in the market though. And one of those, so going into median sales price, as you can see, we're now at 25 straight months of year over year DMV price appreciation. There's not been a single month in 25 months where DMV wide prices have decreased over the same time the prior year. But, or and, as they would say in bold, this is the lowest DMV wide month over month increase in 2 years. And if you look at the weekly data over the past 2 weeks, weekly data, they don't report on sale price, but they will report on list price. You can see the weekly data over the past 2 weeks, median list price has been steady or even a little lower than the same time last year. So definitely indicators that sales price, that appreciation is tapering off a little, and we might even see a little more depreciation in some of these areas. DC has obviously been a softer market in a lot of these months as far as where their prices were at, but pricing pressure definitely seems to be easing. Something to keep an eye on. And then related to that, median days on market. Median days on market for June shot up to 12. And that's relatively meaningful because last June was 7 days. And, you know, almost double of where we were at same time last year. Now we're taking a closer look at closed sales and new pendings. Closed sales being up 6% year over year, not a surprise because pendings were up last month. And I mean, there always is some fallout, but when we see a spike in pendings, then we know the following month we're going to see a spike in closed sales. What's more important to keep an eye on, at least, is new pendings. So new pendings slowed down in June. They were just about even with where they were at the prior year, down 1.7%. And so far, I can't really tell what's happening in July. We're a couple of weeks in, and new pendings were up in the first week, but then down in the second week. We also have the 4th of July and all of that, but the 4th of July was happening last year as well. So that should be accounted for in looking at it year over year. But it's right now, the data in July, it's TBD as to where we will be ending up. As always, I really do. This is genuine. I think if I say it enough, maybe everyone will believe me that I would love to hear what people do. People have buyers. What's happening with your buyer pools? Are you having more buyers put things on hold? Are you having more buyers come off the fence? Are you having buyers reach out to you just out of the blue? I know me personally, I'm seeing a little bit of an uptick in buyer activity, but like I rely more on the data than what I see personally, because what I see personally is just a fraction of what's happening. Temmie,
Yeah,
did you want to chime in?
I'm seeing an uptick in buyers starting to like get out, look at homes. I think the expectation is different. When we were in a hotter market, people were making decisions quicker. Now, as a like we have to show up more as a consultant and help people process and think, because what they want is more, right? Like they're looking for the more of the perfect house versus and we know that you're not going to get absolutely everything that you want in a home. I usually say you typically get about 80 or 90%. I'm happy to have that conversation more and more. There's a lot of buyer hesitation. So even if they're ready, they're pre-approved, they have a deadline, there's still some. I'm still seeing some hesitation before like pulling the trigger, a
Mhm.
lot more so than I've seen in the past. And then of course you have the buyers who, we're going to purchase, but then they're still feeling hesitation because of the job market, or they see something in the
Mhm.
news and then they pull back. So I'm seeing definitely a big mixture.
Yeah. For that second group, like I said, that's why it's more important than ever that we're here providing them with accurate, informed advice on that. And then for the first part, it was, sorry, I have like 20 different screens going on. I completely forgot your first part. What was it? What was your?
buyer hesitation before pulling the trigger. So
Yeah,
they're ready,
yeah,
willing, and able,
yeah,
but when we see properties, they're not super ready. So I'm having to ask more questions as we're looking at, in the consultation, but then also as we're
yeah.
looking at properties.
And that's where it's funny. You talk about people's actions or people's feelings right now aren't necessarily based on absolutes, but maybe more on the change of where it's been. And you still have outside of DC, we're still in sellers markets everywhere, but it's days on market, median days on market, like might be 12 instead of 7. And so now all of a sudden buyers are like, it's all I have all the power. Not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
So seen a lot of great comments coming in, and yeah, Virginia mentioning that they're out there modifying their search, lowering their top budget. Yeah, and that's true. It's the expectations before were mortgage rates would be coming down, so people were projecting where their budget was at. They might think they had a little more purchasing power. Now it's looking like that's not going to happen, and might have to adjust those budgets. And yeah, the I just want to say, Tom, I want to get in your circle. I want to get those buyers with family money. That's pretty nice. And yeah, Sam, I'd be curious for you to add. You're talking about getting more buyers under contract than ever before, and the reasons for that, is that just because I know you're putting in a lot of extra work? So what do you feel any of that is just related to changing market conditions, or is that just because you're working your butt off and it's kind of an accumulative snowball effect of all the work you've been putting in since you've gotten into real estate? My feeling is it's more a result of the work you're putting in rather than market changes, but love to hear what you feel personally. And yeah, thank you, Christina. There's definitely a lot of anxiety there. So going ahead to new listings. New listings are tapering off, and this again, we hear so much misinformation and kind of the roof is on fire, or the bottom is falling out of the market, and people are flooding the market and selling houses and fleeing the DMV. And here we're at, basically new listings for June were almost identical to where they were at last June. So it's just, we're not seeing kind of a crazy meaningful increase in these new listings. Now, active inventory, true, active inventory is increasing, but again, it's sorry, and I just get so annoyed with people saying completely erroneous things, or even people who are presenting themselves as experts. And yeah, we have seen an increase in active listings, but I just want to touch on, this is the 17th straight month of DMV wide increases in inventory. So the last time we didn't have higher inventory in a given month in the same month the year before. Timmy, I don't know if I'm getting some feedback. I'm not sure if it's coming. Last time that happened was January of year, like not this year, the year before. So well before the new administration, well before the election. So this trend of higher inventory, this has been happening long before tariffs, long before threatening to fire the Federal Reserve Chairman, long before Doge got into every aspect of federal government. So it's not to say that isn't having an effect, but this trend in the market of higher inventory has been happening for almost a year and a half right now. And want to note that an increase of not a whole lot is still not a whole lot. We are still, I always go back to 2019. I consider that the last normal year we had in real estate before the pandemic hit, and then all sorts of unusual things were happening. But we're still at less than 81% of the inventory level of June of 2019. So DMV wide, we're still not even at what would be considered by most to be a normal inventory level. Now, that's not true for each individual county. There's definitely higher inventory than 2019 in some areas, but DMV wide, we're still at a lower level of inventory. Yeah, and that's interesting. Tierney comments that she's seeing buyers who were expressed concerns earlier jumping back in, people who were on pause jumping. Yeah, and this is, yeah, looking and talking multi-generational living. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. And I love hearing this all from you, because this is what I'm seeing at a granular level, and this explains the data. It's like sometimes the data is more accurate, but it can also be a little confusing to understand. And that's what, like, the data right now is telling me that there is a great level of uncertainty in the market, and we're just seeing things that from area to area or from month to month that doesn't necessarily make sense normally, but could be perfectly explained by high levels of uncertainty, a lot of people on the fence, and this kind of start, stop, start, stop. And we'll jump into all of that in just a moment. This is more for when I send out the deck. This is just all the key metrics. We've talked about most of these for the month. Now we are going to take a closer look at the county data. Now, median sales price. We talked about the DMV wide levels. Now we're going to jump in a little here, and you can see right off the bat, obviously, that Alexandria and Arlington had big drops in median sales price. And I always want to, whenever there's anything that surprises me, just want to take a closer look. Alexandria covers such a diverse area as far as price points and property types. I always take anything going on with Alexandria and median sales price with a grain of salt because it's almost always explainable by the distribution of sales in a given month. And like I took a quick peek and properties last June, there was one property in Alexandria that sold for 150 to 199,000. And this past month there were 6 properties that sold for 150 to 199,000. So I mean that's not a huge number, but it's still, so that's going to be swinging the median line. That's going to be swinging the average line. So median sales price, if you just look under the hood a little bit in Alexandria, the detached and condos, median sales price for both of those were up, but townhomes were down by almost 30% and median sales price. So I think that's driven more by, like I said, the distribution of sales rather than a real decline in property values. Because if you look at the average sales price for each of those components, they were either even or up. And then when you look under the hood in Arlington, that decline was due solely to condos. So in Arlington, there was no median sales price decrease for fee simple. Those all increased. Condos had a 16.5% drop in median sales price over that time. Fairfax, I don't know. I this is actually wait. I think because Kimber's on here, Virginia's on here. I've asked this question before, and I would love it. I'm not too hopeful anyone will have the answer here in real time because asked it in so many different scenarios and haven't gotten the answer. But if you look at Fairfax, if you break down the data provided by MLS for Fairfax, you have a decline in median sales price year over year for all property types. But if you divide it down into, there's a median sales price increase for detached homes. Median sales price was even for attached townhomes and up for condos in Fairfax in June. So the data provided, if you break it down, it says for all property types, there was a decrease in median sales price. But if you look at each individual property type that comprises that total number, they were all either even or up. Not a single property type had a decline in median sales price. If anyone knows why this is happening, I would love to hear it. I don't know if it's like multifamily is included in the overall number and they don't include it in the breakdown or what it is. But I've had this happen so many times where I see a number that doesn't make sense. I look a little more closely and the component parts don't add up to the overall number. So anyone helps me understand that, lets me know why, gives me the answer from Bright MLS or Smart Charts or wherever, then I will love you forever. I'll take a closer look at Sam's comments. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's based off of your previous question on him seeing more buyers. uh, you know, he's putting more buyers under contract now than he's ever been before. I totally agree with you, Sam, as far as
Mm-hmm.
um, there is this minefield of for a lot of buyers, we're not competing as hard in some areas, in some locations, to be able to get a property. So some people see it as an opportunity. It's great, and then for some people, it's more than they've kind of seen before. Like we have options, and for some people with options, it could paralyze them because they're like,
Mm-hmm.
which one do I pick? Perfect property. And for some people, it energizes them. And I think Sam has done a really great job being a consultant to his client to help him make decisive decisions.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And that hints to, yeah, very true. And that goes into one of my key takeaways that it's still a great time to buy. It's like a great time to buy and a great time to sell. This is an improved market for each side in certain ways, I believe, and makes the timing right now pretty good for that. We'll touch on that in a little more detail. So now just want to jump into closed sales pretty specifically. So not a surprise. This goes back to what I was saying. If you look at the new pending numbers, if you know what the new pending numbers are in a given month, then the closed sales in the following month shouldn't surprise you. And this pretty much tracks what we saw for new pendings last month. You can see that DC and closer in had higher buyer demand, and that's resulting in higher closed sales this month. Demand softening a little farther out in Maryland and Virginia. Now, this past month for new pendings, it's still a little softening of demand in farther out Maryland. So Frederick and Prince George's County, we saw a decline in pendings. Montgomery County, a little closer in, is even. And then Northern Virginia is a mixed bag. So decent bumps in Arlington and Alexandria. And then Loudoun is up, but Fairfax is down. So I find that kind of interesting. That obviously isn't necessarily to be explained by a key like closer or farther out from core beltway. And the reason why I touch on that is just we're seeing more back to work mandates. And so it's always interesting to see if I can look at the data and see, okay, that these back to work mandates, the inability for people to be working from home farther out, if that's affecting a migration of flow of buyers in either direction. And this tracks also the overall number. What we saw is that we're seeing increasing days on market everywhere. But going back to the beating the dead horse, yeah, days on market are increasing everywhere. It's important to follow that. It's important to understand it. It's important to recognize that. I would take that as a key indicator of a softening of the market, softening from where we were before. But homes are still going under contract really quick everywhere outside of DC, super quick everywhere outside of DC and Prince George's County. Arlington, Prince George's County, and DC, they were all almost double of what they were last year. So keep an eye on that. If that trend increases, then that might be an indicator that those markets are getting a little more soft. But it's still, homes are going under contract relatively quick in all areas not known as DC. Now, months of supply. Okay, does anyone on this call think we're in a buyer's market outside of DC? And I don't, I'm talking about in the core areas that Bright covers for Metro DC, which is these counties and the district. Because I hear it so much. Just hear it so much on social media, in articles, and from people just, we're in a buyer's market. So here, take a look. Yeah, we're seeing increases of inventory year over year in all of these areas, but there is still no meaningful inventory in any of these areas outside of DC. So DC has a little more than 5 months of inventory. Everywhere else, somewhere between a little over and under 2 months. 2 months of inventory, nowhere close to a buyer's market. And so things I'll also hear is that, Paul, yeah, your all this data is old. You're talking about June. You don't know what's actually happening right now. And it's like, yeah, it's true. All data is going to have some lag, but I try to mitigate that in a variety of ways by pulling the weekly data and looking at things a little more closely recently. So as of yesterday, and yes, I manually went and pulled inventory levels from all of these places yesterday. Can't get much more current than that. I mean, yeah, I could have done it today, but I didn't have time this morning. So as of yesterday, there's less than 2 months of inventory in Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, Frederick, Loudoun, Montgomery counties. Less than 2 months of inventory in all of these places. Prince George's was a little over 2 months, and then DC is between 4 and 5 months. So this is as of yesterday. What is there right now? There is still a seller's market in all of these areas outside of DC. So objectively, this is countywide across all property types. We are still in a seller's market unless your seller is in DC. And then it kind of varies depending on property type. Condos have the highest inventory. Condo market is the softest. So it's just, hearing so much anecdotally that doesn't track what is happening. All right, new listings. So this shines a spotlight on another misconception talked about, a clickbait notion. We're seeing inventory flooding the market, and that's just not the case. We're seeing inventory DMV wide levels are all about even. DMV wide, all about even. We are seeing a bit of a bump, Arlington in particular, and that's driven by condos, by the way. So that bump of almost 20% in new listings in Arlington, that's a huge component of that is condos. Fee simple, still relatively limited supply. So we new listings were up by about 10% Montgomery County, down a bit in DC, close to even everywhere else. So active listings up everywhere, but take this with a grain of salt. We already looked at overall inventory. If you have double the inventory of last year, but last year you had a month of inventory, this year you have 2 months of inventory, you still don't really have much inventory. But these numbers are still increasing, and they have been for quite some time. Got a comment offline from a colleague, Susan. She is in Florida, joint practice Florida and Virginia. So it's always wonderful to hear what she's seen, because she has a much broader geographical footprint than I do with just the DMV, and saying that, yeah, and this is true. It's not a buyer's market, but the uncertainty is making some areas feel like it. And that's also, she says she has clients looking for assumed loans and seeing more offered. Same for me. I'm seeing that. I have more clients who are looking for that, and I'm seeing that advertised in more listings. If you have a client looking to sell a VA home, or a home on a VA loan or FHA that's assumable, definitely advertise that. If you have a VA home seller, you don't necessarily want to allow a buyer without VA eligibility to assume that loan, because that would take that portion of your eligibility for a while. But
Yeah, it's like, don't forget to ask that question, especially if your home is sitting on the market. I had a situation like that where we weren't getting any push, and then I just asked about their interest rate, and then when we put it on the market as a FHA assumable for like 2 point, I think 2%, it was we ended up getting 4 offers, 4 or 6 offers, and then and we closed that, and then I had another situation where they had let go of their previous agent. They were on the market for a few months, no offers. And then I asked all the questions, asked about their assumable. They had a assumable mortgage for 2 point something percent. And we literally got it under contract that weekend when they had spent months on the market before. So make sure to ask the question, regardless of the price point, do they have an assumable mortgage? And then just keep that in your back pocket. It may not, if they want to sell quickly, it may not be the first thing that you market, but if it's sitting and you don't want to reduce the price, bring that out and see if you can get someone to close that way.
mhm, absolutely. Yeah, if you have an assumable loan, I mean, every percent below current levels will drop monthly costs by about 10%. Now, of course, m- most of the time when a buyer assumes a loan, there's going to be a gap, and that has to be covered by something. And if you get a second mortgage, your rate is going to be higher than 30-year fixed rates. So if the gap is too big, it still could not make sense. But like I said, informed decisions. If you decide the gap is too high, where economically it's not going to make sense for buyers, better to know that and then maybe not market it, or you could still market it and just leave it up to the buyer to make that decision. So going to showing level. So this isn't surprising. Also, if you paid attention to the new pending levels, you saw that new pendings were up in Alexandria and Arlington. Showing levels were up. Okay, that's not a surprise. People need to see properties in order to write offers on them, or at least usually they do. Not always, as we know from some of the hotter times in this market. So you see that in the increased buyer activity here. And then new pendings were down by more than 10% in Prince George's County. You see that reflected in the new pendings. Loudoun was interesting. So I'm always just, when I see stuff like this, I'm like, mental note. I don't do much business in Loudoun, although I did drive through there on the way to a lake cabin for the 4th of July. But Loudoun had a almost 6% increase in new pendings, but you can see showing levels were only up by 1.8%. So if I was hosting open houses in Loudoun or doing anything in Loudoun, I would just know, okay, there may be fewer buyers out there, but the buyers that are out there are a little more serious. Now, just taking a quick peek at the weekly snapshot. So it's interesting that showings are up here, but new pendings are down. So this is DMV wide. And then I talked about with our pending level, it's like pending levels were up early in July, now have dropped a little. So you add that to the showing level, and it's like not really certain how July is going to shake out compared to last year. It looks like we're going to be somewhat similar across the board, but maybe a little bit softer. The one thing, though, that is becoming clear, it was definitely clear from June, it's becoming more clear if you're looking at July, is that overall properties are taking a little bit longer to sell. So like I said, still seller's market throughout most of the area, but the market is softening. It's not as strong of a market as far as the supply demand calculus. So you're seeing demand rise a little, or you're seeing demand soften a little relative to the supply we have. So median days on market up to 33 days for the area. Now we are heading into a slow time of year. Yeah, it's late July, early August. It tends to be one of the slowest times of the DC real estate year, but that's a week higher than this exact same time last year. So another thing to keep an eye on. Active listings also continue to increase over last year's level, but this is a smaller year-over-year jump than we've been seeing. So I heard a lot of comments of just inventory is going to be flooding the market. People are leaving DC. Everyone's getting fired. They have to sell their homes. And we're actually seeing new listings and active listing levels kind of a little lower uh, than the increase we've seen in past months and weeks. So just really quickly, I have a few minutes left. How are new administration policies affecting real estate? And this is, excuse me, this is tough to tell because it's like there's what's blasted on social media or what's announced. Then there's what is tried to be implemented. And then there's what actually gets implemented and doesn't get blocked by the courts. So because of that, there's just so much uncertainty here. One thing I can say with certainty, though, is that we're getting higher mortgage rates than we would have otherwise. Policies and uncertainty are wreaking havoc in the bond market. They're pushing 10-year Treasury yields. As I mentioned, the new budget, if it fully goes through, it'll add about $3.4 trillion to the deficit this year. And that's going to, Treasury yields are going to have to increase with that, which is going to lead to higher mortgage rates and with all the inflationary pressure from tariffs. So it's one thing I can say for certain is mortgage rates are higher now than they would have been otherwise. And they're going to continue to be higher than they would have otherwise for at least a little bit. And just a little side note, as the talk of Federal Reserve Chairman Powell being fired, if he is fired, all of this will worsen dramatically. I mean, the markets will literally lose their minds. So I would say if you have a buyer who is like under contract but hasn't locked yet, I would call them right up now and tell them to lock, because it's I literally, if I see if Chairman Powell is fired, we could see a very quick spike in mortgage rates and just a level of uncertainty where it's like, who knows what is going to happen, because that would show that there's an even greater level of unpredictability. So just volatility. No one knows what to expect. All markets depend on stability. All markets depend on stability. It's like, how can you make a decision if you don't know the environment you'll be stepping into tomorrow or the next day or the next week? And this is true for the financial markets, and this is true for the real estate market. And we hear this from our clients all the time. Search of inventory, new listings, I've already talked about that ad nauseum. We're seeing higher inventory levels. That trend began before the new administration. Economy and tariffs, it's normally in a typical situation, I would say, and I was saying for quite some time, that an economic slowdown, a mild recession, would be the best thing to happen to the DC real estate market, because it would bring down mortgage rates, and demand was already higher than supply, and so bringing down mortgage rates would increase supply, and we would have more transactions, more vibrant market. But now it's just kind of tough because there's so much more uncertainty that we're probably going to have an economic slowdown coupled with higher inflation and higher interest rates. So that's just a horrible combination. Okay, 3 takeaways, super quick. This has been takeaway every month since I've been doing this, but it's just now more important than ever for us all to stay up to speed, up to date on what is happening in the market and what will likely be happening going forward. And then for consumers, for buyers and sellers, even more important than ever to be talking to those of us who are highly educated in the market and making informed decisions. If the decision is informed, that's all you can ask for. And going back, touched on this, little spoiler alert, still a good time to buy. is we talked about DC home prices have risen for 25 straight months. People who waited to buy are just paying more now. You can always refinance later and get a lower mortgage rate. But there's also like silver lining there, because days on market are creeping up a little, inventory is creeping up a little, and so your options, you're getting a little bit more options. We talked about this with the group, saying there are few more homes out there when we've been looking. Competition isn't quite as high, so that's nice for buyers. But sellers still have the advantage, so it's also a good time to sell. Most of the DMV remains a seller's market, but the market's showing signs of slowing down. So if I was thinking of selling anytime in the next year, I would probably do so beginning of fall, because I'd be worried about the market softening even more going forward. So I would want to take advantage of our nice little vibrant fall markets. If you do have sellers that are going on, it's also because it's the calculus is shifting just a little, more important than ever to price right, because buyers are educated, buyers are smart. Doesn't matter what kind of market you're in. If you overprice your property, that's the surest way to have a poor listing. Okay, we are 1 minute over, but I will stick around for a minute or two if anyone has any follow-up questions or comments or thoughts. As always, appreciate you all joining us. I love the interaction, love the input from everyone. Thank you to everybody who chimed in and sat with us this Thursday morning.
Bye,
Tammy,
guys. Thank you.
thank you, Virginia. Any closing thoughts? Thank you, Gene.
I think just a reminder that before making any type of decisions as agents for our clients, we have the market data. We can go on to Bright, like just even with our listings, going on to Bright, looking at the market data, so we can better educate our clients on what's going on in their particular area. Like we can, so if you're in Prince George County, Charles County, DC, like you can look up the data before trying to educate your clients versus going off your feelings.
Mm-hmm. Or going off, even if you were following things closely, going off what you knew to be the case last month, which isn't
Yeah.
necessarily the case this month. So,
Yeah.
so true. So true. All right. Thank you
And
so much,
just
Tammy. Hey,
yeah,
yep.
and one more thing, and just verifying the things that you see on social media.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I want to add. So the thing I told you last month, Bright had a survey that said 37% of agents were saying the federal government changes, Doge, was having a negative impact in housing prices. And I was like, 37% of agents are saying it's causing housing prices to decline, when the only area in the DMV to have a year over year decrease was Frederick. And then I saw the Washingtonian pick up on that and say it's causing like a market slowdown. So it's like, okay, even if that is true, if you have 30% of the agents are saying it, they're saying it's causing, wait, no, this was a different thing. Actually, they keyed up on another, like 38% of agents were saying that the administration policies were causing there to be more sellers and buyers. Like it was causing people to, buy or sell when they wouldn't otherwise. I was like, okay, 37% increase in buyers or sellers, that would be a more vibrant market. You would have more transactions, not a slowdown. So yeah, be very, very careful. If you see anything on social media that doesn't come from me or Temi, disregard it off the bat. All right. Bye all. Great seeing you. Catch you
Thank you,
next month.
guys.